My point is that the best case scenario for Israel would be a war between Iran and the United States, and Israel being at the margins of the war, not being that much involved in the war. That's the best case scenario.
That's not going to happen. The Iranians are too smart. They said, correct me if I'm wrong, but the statement is, if America bombs us, we hit Israel with everything we have, because we treat Israel as an extension of America. We don't separate the two. If Israel attacks us, we hit the American bases, because Israel and America are the same. Our target deck will not change. If you want a war with us, we'll bomb the same targets regardless of who starts the war. That's just the truth. That's what the Iranians have said. And I believe them. I believe them. I believe that if the United States bombed Iran, Tel Aviv would be turned upside down that night. So there's no best case scenario for Israel. Israel's in an existential crisis of its own making by defining Iran as the greatest threat in the world to Israel, and therefore a threat that needs to be taken out. They've basically allowed for only one solution that's politically acceptable, but that's a solution they can't execute, they can't achieve. So they have a political problem. Donald Trump is fortunate that he hasn't painted Iran into that corner yet. Iran right now is purely a nuclear problem. Marco Rubio is trying to make it a ballistic missile problem. But I think that the more the Iranians just say, look, we don't want a war. But the only reason why we're here today is because we have these missiles that you're scared of, and we're not giving them up. If you want us to give them up, you have to not only pull all your aircraft carriers away. Here's the deal. This is what I would tell them. We'll take our missiles off of frontline status and put them in storage spaces. You take your aircraft carriers and put them into port. And then as you decommission your aircraft carriers, we'll decommission our missiles. Meanwhile, we want inspectors on the ground in Israel making sure that all of their airplanes have been throttled down so they can't fly long distances. We don't want any Israeli aircraft that can reach Iran. And what reach Iran means they can't fly into Iraq and fire their standoff missiles. So you eliminate Israel's long-range strike capability verifiably. You eliminate your ability to, and then we'll get rid of the missiles. Fair's fair, right? Because anything else is just setting Iran up to be destroyed. The only reason why Iran exists today is because of its long-range ballistic missile program. That's it. That's the only reason. And to give it up and not insist on other changes is suicide.
The other point in the other alternative in the calculation, in the equation that we have here in the West Asia is the assessment on the part of the Arab states together with Turkey. And they were trying to somehow make some sort of bridge between the United States and Iran to bring them together. And how did you find their sort of behavior in that direction? Do you think that they're honest in the way that they're behaving? Do you think that, because after all, nobody, in my opinion, nobody would be happy about any new escalation in the Middle East, in the West Asia, between the United States and Iran, because that would be totally a devastation for the whole region. It's not just about Iran and the United States. The whole region would somehow, somehow gets devastated by the war, by the economy of the war, the consequences of the war, the escalation, the attacks, and all of that. Do you think that they understand, they grasp that sort of the reality of a new war in the Middle East? That's why they're trying to do this?
There's no doubt that if you're an oil-producing country, you understand the consequences of an American-Israeli attack on Iran that expands into striking Iranian energy infrastructure. Iran then will destroy Azerbaijani oil production capability, Saudi Arabian oil production capability, Kuwaiti oil production capability. They'll probably destroy UAE, anybody, everybody. They will create an energy crisis. And so you have to weigh that in mind. The Saudis, they're trying to please everybody. We know that the Saudis have made a concerted diplomatic effort to reach out to Iran and that there's been high-level contacts and they are looking to create stability, regional stability. We also know that Saudi Arabia at this point in time is dependent upon America for its security. They haven't been able to divorce themselves. This is why Saudi Arabia is looking for not just the bilateral security agreement with Pakistan, which was a response to the Israeli attack on Qatar, but now they're possibly looking to extend it to Turkey as well. And again, that's to create a very strong foundation to contain Israel. Israel is the problem and America is the supporter of Israel. So Saudi Arabia is torn right now. So I think it's very possible, because I've read things. I don't, you got to be careful what you read because there's a whole bunch of misinformation being put out there. But, I've read that the Saudis are encouraging the United States to attack. I also know that Saudi Arabia is continuing to provide bases for American military aircraft. They say that they won't allow their bases to be used, but they've lied before. And if it comes to, again, a situation where the United States says, this is the knockout blow, meaning we're going in for the kill, I think Saudi Arabia at this juncture would say, okay, do it. Use our bases, do it, but kill them, kill them, kill them. Do not let them survive. And you have to kill them quick, because otherwise they're going to take out our oil fields. And that's bad news for us. So I think there's that sentiment in Saudi Arabia and maybe in other nations as well. Turkey's interesting. The Zanzibar corridor. You remember that? I mean, this was a big crisis between Turkey, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Iran. And Iran said, if you build the Zanzibar corridor, we're not sitting by idly. This could be about war and everything. And Tom Barak was in there pushing this thing. It was his Trump's corridor, Trump's peace corridor. Trump deserves the peace prize because of the peace corridor and the Zanzibar. No one's talking about it anymore. No one's talking. Why? There's some interesting things happening right now. In Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, in Abkhazia, the breakaway republic, the Russians are working really hard to get that rail line open. Why? Well, because it goes from, if you open up that rail line, you've got direct connectivity from St. Petersburg, the Far East, all the rail lines come in, and now you have a rail line that doesn't go through Baku and then have to use the Caspian Sea. You have a rail line that comes down through Georgia into Armenia and into Iran. And suddenly you can put a trainload of goods in St. Petersburg and bring it all the way down the Chabahar. And then it goes into the Indian Ocean. Chinese goods can do the same thing. And Turkey's okay with this now. See, Turkey was looking for this corridor that busts through Armenia and got into Azerbaijan to get into Central Asia. But Turkey's not playing that game anymore. Why? Israel. And I think Turkey's now recognizing that there's a greater threat from Israel and from the United States, pressuring Arab states into this, Abraham Accord type arrangement. Israel has declared Turkey, some Israelis have declared Turkey to be a greater strategic threat to Israel than Iran. And so Turkey's changing its posture a little bit. And it's just fascinating to watch. Watching the Zanzibar corridor disappear is a geopolitical problem, because there was a while back, this, we talked about this before, where this was going to be a war. Iran actually was sending troops up to the border with Azerbaijan. No one's talking about, because it doesn't exist. No one's trying to make it happen. They're instead of going, west to east, it's north to south. And the Russians are doing things in Abkhazia right now that nobody's talking about. It's well below the radar, but they are working with the Abkhazians and the Georgians to get that rail line open, because that's a game changer. And I think the fact that Turkey is now facilitating this speaks volumes about where Turkey stands in terms of, the geopolitics of the region. Turkey's not an enemy of Iran. Turkey's a friend of Iran. They may compete on certain things, but Turkey is a friend of Iran. And I think, Turkey is adjusting its geopolitical vision to incorporate the possibility of friendship with Iran. And that's a good thing. I think it plays to Iran's benefit. So, we'll see. You got to correct me if I'm wrong. The negotiations were they supposed to be in Turkey first, and then they were talking about moving them, or were they supposed to be somewhere else and then move to Turkey?
No, it was supposed to be in Turkey, in Istanbul. Then they moved it to Muscat in Oman.
Yeah.
It's going to be in Oman. If I'm not mistaken, they're going to talk to each other on Friday. I don't know if it's going to be direct talk. Even they're talking about directly talking to each other. Steve Witkoff together with, the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi. And I think, Scott, what has happened to Iran, I've been outside of Iran for more than 12 years, and then I came back and see what was happening with this internal, manipulation from the outside. They were trying to, manipulate everything here, and the outcome of what has happened in the last, few months. You see how Iran is getting closer to Russia. When you see the head of the Security Council of Iran, which literally is the one of the closest persons to the supreme leader of Iran, going to Russia, talking with Russia.
Shamkhani, right?
Yeah. It's Ali Larijani.
Larijani, but Shamkhani was.
Shamkhani is one of the military experts, and he has a lot of expertise because he was in the war in Iraq, and he's part of that council that
Right.
one of the advisors to the supreme leader of Iran,
going to Moscow, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But Ali Larijani, he's the head of the Security Council, and he's so much important. He's one of the most important characters right now. And what's funny, he was not in this position before the war with breaking out between Iran, and he came and he changed. He has a lot of power to be.
Well, what's curious, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was barred from running for president.
Yeah.
in the last election because
exactly
yeah,
he was.
And so here's a man who, this just shows you the stupidity of the West. That you have a situation in Iran where the moderates are prevailing, and they're starting to squeeze out some of the old school conservatives and everything. And again, if I were in the CIA running the Iran Mission Center, I think we closed it, but whatever, I'd be telling the president, let this happen. Just hands off. Let this happen naturally. We're getting the changes in Iran that we want to get. We don't have to go to war. And once we get political leadership change, we can come in with the carrot, the lifting of the sanctions, and the military will be weakened. We can then work on getting the ranges of the missiles down. We can get everything we want by letting Iran do this on their own. Oh, we're going to bomb them. Oh, good. You bombed them. And Ali Larijani, who was banned from running for president, is now one of the most powerful people in Iran, one of the most influential people. Now, I've never met the man, but I've studied him. He's a rational actor. He's not an irresponsible actor. He's a rational actor, but I wouldn't call him moderate or liberal. Isn't his brother some big official in the judiciary?
Yeah, exactly. His brother was one of the, and he is, he's not liberal at all, but he has right now, the point that I brought up, his name, that his travel to Russia was so important in my opinion, because that shows how close is the relationship between Iran and Russia is somehow transforming, is in a way that I have never imagined it before, that they would get in this this sort of closeness. And how do you see, Scott, there was, you remember, we were talking about the conflict in Ukraine for such a long time, for more than 4 years. We're talking about the conflict even before and after the war, and we were always talking about how Russia is getting closer to China, and we see the same pattern happening here in Iran. I see that this happening, just amazing to see, the two countries getting closer and closer, and and
especially given the history.
yeah,
Especially
yeah,
given the history. I mean, not just the history of back in the Wild West of the colonial period with Imperial Russia running rampant throughout Persia weakened. The Soviet occupation of Persia of Iran during World War II, and the effort by some in the Soviet Union, at least, to carve off northern Iran and make it a Soviet republic. And then there's just the overall. When I was in the Marines, I was assigned to the Rapid Deployment Force. The 7th Marine Amphibious Brigade was the Marine component of this. And in 1985, we reworked the intelligence portion of the the operation plan, for intervening in Iran because the Soviets were going to make a move on the warm water ports of Chabahar and Bandar Abbas. And so our plan, we were going to do an amphibious operation, seize Bandar Abbas, seize Chabahar, put forces ashore, etc. And at that time, you have a counterintelligence packet, and there were lists, white lists, the good Iranians that we could bring in and use. The blacklist, they're the guys that we round up and put in prison. The gray guys that we have to monitor. But we were looking at Iran, as a nation that was at threat from Soviet intervention, and the Iranians were too. The Iranians were concerned about that. What would happen if the Russians made a move on the warm water ports? Up until 1970. 78, 79, Iran was part of CENTO, the Central Treaty Organization, along with Iraq. They left Turkey. When I was in Turkey, my father was an advisor to the Turkish Air Force, and the Iranian connectivity was there. We used to have a basketball tournament in the high school, the George C. Marshall High School, and the CSTL. I forget what that stood for, but it's a tournament where we invite teams from Greece, came all American high schools. Team from Greece came, the Turkish teams came in, and we had two teams from Iran come in, Isfahan and Tehran. American high school teams came in 1975, 76, and 77. I think 77 they may have gotten canceled because there was stuff going on, but there was this connectivity, NATO style connectivity with Iran up until the late 70s. And the Islamic Republic brutally suppressed the communists in Iran. Was it the Tuda party? Hi, you're all legal. Come on out of the woodworks, registered, everything. Thank you for registering. Arrest them all and shoot them. Thank you. And the Soviets were like, you can't do that. So there's this animosity, this mistrust, this dislike. And again, if I were in the CIA, I'd be like, play up on this. They don't like the Russians. Don't let them get close to the Russians. Don't let this happen. And yet we screwed it up. I mean, even when they had common cause, if you remember early on in the Syrian intervention for Russia, the Russians were firing air-launched cruise missiles and that were striking targets, ISIS targets inside Syria. And they got permission from the Iranians to fire them over and actually have the bombers come into Iranian airspace and release the munitions. And then they went and got permission to actually land their aircraft at an Iranian base. That was 2015 or 2016. And the Iranians said, get them the hell out of here. We don't want Russian planes on our bases. The Iranian people said, no. And that, that tells you there's deep-seated resentment out there. And yet today, just the opposite is happening. You have Iranian military officers training at Russian military academies, going to schools to learn the different trades. You have Iranian engineers, military industrial engineers, working with the Russians in various factories, learning things. You have Russians coming in and learning from the Iranians. You have military on military delegations. And the most important thing is you have a strategic security agreement that's been ratified finally by the Iranians. I mean, I loved it when everybody in June, why aren't the Russians helping? Because the Iranians never ratified the agreement. So maybe the Russians can't help because there is no legal framework to help. Now, it's not a mutual defense agreement. Russia's not going to come running and go to war against the United States or Israel if they bomb. But just read between the lines. How did the Iranians shut down Starlink? By themselves? Or were they advised by people who have a history of shutting down Starlink? Is there an intelligence relationship, a security relationship? There wasn't in June because the Iranians hadn't ratified the agreement. Today there is. And if I were a gambling man, I would bet a lot of money on the fact that the Russians were working with the Iranians to help them manipulate Starlink, shut down Starlink, track Starlink, collect intelligence from Starlink, the whole thing. I think the Russians are helping them in other ways too. I mean, the Russians have some specialized collection capabilities. And when the United States flies a B-2 bomber, and remember, the United States has been flying B-2 bombers in the region for a long time, but they flew a strike package into Iran that was predictable because they told the Iranians all about it. And do you think the Iranians told the Russians about it? Yep. And do you think the Russians collected? Yep. And now the data that they collected on the flight profile of these aircraft, I believe, has been turned over to the Iranians, and they are developing solutions. One of the things Donald Trump has to really worry about is that if you bring B-2 bombers into Iranian airspace, you may lose a B-2 bomber because the Iranians aren't stupid. Remember, they're the ones that hijacked the Beast of Kandahar. You know that big B-2 looking drone that used to fly out of Kandahar and was hanging out over Mashhad, trying to photograph where these secret underground sites where the Iranian government hides in crises. They hijacked it. Now, I mean, we don't have to get into the specifics, but the thing is controlled from the ground, taken up in the air, and then there's a period of time where the ground controllers turn it over to a satellite to controllers in Nevada who fly it. Now, it's all done with encryption, which means you have to have the NSA's up-to-date encryption package. It changes all the time. The Iranians were tracking it as it left, got that whole handover procedure down, and they were tracking it as it was passed over. And what the Iranians did is intercept the pass-off signal and take it over and fly it into Iran. And wow, they're pretty good. The Iranians are some of the smartest people in the world about these things. They've been watching the United States for a long time. But come on, America, understand. Everything we did in Iraq, everything that we did in Syria, the Iranians were watching it. Everything we did in Afghanistan, the Iranians were watching it. They know everything. Everything. And they're ready. That doesn't mean that we don't have things they don't know about. Of course we do. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a cakewalk either direction. But when you spend that much money on an airplane, I forget what the price of a B-2 is, but it's a lot. You can't afford to have one or two shot down. And my concern is that if the United States were to try to repeat that strike package, that the Iranians might be able to shoot down one or two B-2 bombers because the Russians have been helping them, because the Chinese have been helping them. There's a lot going on right now, a lot of information going on. A key aspect of survivability of these weapon systems is their stealth characteristics. But when the stealth characteristics are collected by nations capable of collecting those and solutions are derived, the Iranians are fully capable of maybe developing their own solution to the B-2 problem, but they're definitely capable of understanding the solutions given to them by the Russians and the Chinese and making the adjustments necessary or receiving specialized equipment. The Russians may have provided some specialized equipment that is capable of tracking stealth aircraft. So this is not the Iran of June of last year. I think Iran is a completely different Iran today. And a large part of that is because they now have this great relationship with Russia. And it's not just military. They're talking about politics. I think, again, I'm not Iranian, so it's, woe it be to me to say somebody made a mistake. But, Raisi, I believe, he was the president that died in the helicopter crash, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He was all in on BRICS. I mean, if you remember, the Russians were going to have the BRICS conference in Kazan. The Iranians were going to come in, and this was going to be this is like going to the casino in Vegas and bring in all the money because you're going to win. And they were ready to do that. They got shut down. The new president, the new foreign minister, they backed off. They went cool on it. And so the Kazan, BRICS summit wasn't what it could have been because Iran took a back step. And then, of course, we had the one in Brazil, which was, again, further retarded not in terms of stupid, but retarded in terms of its potential to perform. I think the Iranians are now waking up to two realities. The West isn't your friend and never will be your friend. Sorry. Two, Russia is your friend and wants to be and so do the Chinese. If the Iranians can successfully divorce themselves from the West that they've been attached to for so long and make this pivot to the East, I see nothing but good things for Iran. I see good things economically. I see good things geopolitically. But it's going to require the Iranians to change their mindset. And it's tough because you've got these huge diasporas in the West, especially the American diaspora, that retains connectivity with Iran. And you said it earlier. You talked about, the information warfare operation that's taking place, the propaganda. Now that Iran has good relations with Russia, what I would advise, maybe you could help them. There's a guy named Andrei Ilnitsky. He's a lieutenant general, was an advisor to Shoigu. And he has brought into maturity the concept of mental war. And mental war is hybrid warfare techniques used to collapse a society from within, culturally, intellectually, psychologically. And in order to do that, you have to have connectivity, a flow of data. The Iranian people need to understand this, that the CIA, that MI6 and Mossad are using your connectivity to destroy you from within. That's what they're doing. I just, again, to have fun, why don't you do a survey of all the professors in Tehran, all the University of Tehran who left when these demonstrations started, who decided they didn't want to live in Iran anymore. And ask yourself why they didn't want to live in Iran anymore. And then ask yourself why so many of their students were involved in the violence. Because the connectivity that the pro-Western elite in Iran have creates a vulnerability. I know the Iranian security service is up on this, but there was a time where Iranians could travel freely to Europe and attend conferences. And they were heavily recruited during these conferences, heavily recruited. And then they came back and they used their influence in the universities to recruit people too, people who still believed in the notion that the West is your friend. And that if you could just neutralize these conservatives, sanctions could be lifted and the economy could flourish and everything would be great. That's just going to lead to your downfall. If the Iranian government, the Iranian people allow this connectivity to take place, mental war is being waged against you on a daily basis, working to collapse you from within. You know who's not waging mental war against you? The Russians and the Chinese. The answer is so obvious what Iran needs to do here. I've used this before, and I don't mean to insult any Iranians, but I call it abused spouse syndrome. You know, the wife that gets beat by her husband. He keeps coming back because he loves me. That's Iran in the West. We beat you and we beat you and we beat you. And you keep coming back because you think we love you. We don't love you. We hate you. We despise you. I mean, a husband who beats his wife hates his wife, despises his wife, doesn't love his wife. The United States hates Iran. Really, a visceral hatred for Iran. We don't respect your culture. We don't respect anything, your religion, your language. We don't respect any aspect of you. We belittle you over and over again. And yet, Iranians keep coming to the West, keep turning to the West. It's abuse spouse syndrome. You need to liberate yourself from that. You need to recognize that the United States is your enemy, not your friend. And that's not going to change for a very, very long time. And then you make new friends, better friends. And I think Russia and China are your better friends.